It's such a pleasure to be here today. It is a bit of a pressure to be the first speaker, but I'm honored to be invited. And the NPS group is something that's very close to my heart. I've been fortunate to work with the school group for so long, and Jyotsna ma'am is someone I respect very dearly. And so thank you for having me. Recently, I was at a conference, a leadership dialogue, where out of the blue, we were asked to introduce ourselves. And the person who went right before me was the youngest skydiver in Australia. Another lady who spoke was an award-winning journalist. And when it came my turn, I said without thinking, I have 8 degrees, and I disappoint my family on a daily basis. Now, that got a few chuckles from people, because we really respect people who are humble and self-effacing. Should never be arrogant. You shouldn't talk yourself up. And I get that. I think being respectful is extremely important. We should be humble. We can be self-effacing. But at what point does being humble, being self-effacing, not talking about what you do, not believing in what you do, become something more? How do you create a sense of self-worth and identity navigating your daily situations, right? I think many of us deal with this idea of not being good enough on a daily basis. And why do we think we're not good enough? We've all heard about imposter syndrome, which is real. Interesting new studies have shown that not only is imposter syndrome a real thing, but it doesn't actually affect performance. So you can think that you're not good enough, but you're actually probably doing a really good job. That was an interesting idea for me. And then I thought about, why is it so hard for us to like ourselves? It's so easy for us to be kind to other people. I could look at any one of you and pick out something nice to say. If I know you, I could probably pick out 10 nice things to say. But if I try to stand in front of the mirror and say one nice thing to myself, it's hard, right? And our sense of self-worth is so often defined by what other people tell us, by what other people say to us in front of our faces or behind our backs, what people write about us on public platforms and social media. And very, very rarely is our self-worth defined by ourselves. Very rarely are we able to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, I'm good enough. Or even, I'm a work in progress, and that's okay. Now, I've been trying to figure out why this is. And I was reading up on Martin Seligman's theory of positive psychology. And he said that in some sense, we're wired to be pessimistic. And that served us really well in the previous millennia, right? If you were an optimist and you were sitting out on the one sunny day and said, you know what? I think every day is going to be wonderful like this. We have nothing to worry about. You'd very soon be dead. But if you were a pessimist who said, you know what? I see the sun, and it's probably going to set very soon, and there are going to be storms, and we better be prepared, and we better find a cave, and we better take shelter, you would have survived. But now, do we still have a need to be so pessimistic? Do we still have a need to turn that pessimism towards ourselves? I think this ties in very closely with our idea of identity, right? And I think identity is a very tricky issue. We can't tick a single box. We shouldn't tick a single box. What does it matter if I'm a South Asian, cisgender, heterosexual, married mother of one? How does that define me? Why should it define me? And for all of you, as you go out into the world, as you interact with each other, how do you look at your identity? How do you allow people around you to define your identity? How do you look at success? Who are you today? Who do you want to be tomorrow? What's going to take you from here to there. And in all of this that you have to navigate, how do you maintain a sense of self-worth? And for me, this has been a lifelong journey. So, because I'm a nerd and I'm not very good at video games, I decided to start reading. I started reading what the behavioral economists were saying, what the positive psychologists were saying, what the social psychologists were saying, what the sociologists were saying. And I came up with a few important points, right? So all of you have heard of this concept that Malcolm Gladwell put forth saying, 10,000 hours, right? You want to be successful at something? Work on it for 10,000 hours. Okay, that sounded good. Then I read Dr. Angela Duckworth, and she says, grit. Grit is what can define whether a person will be successful far down the line. She even went as far to say that girls in high school tend to have better exam outcomes than boys because they're more gritty. What is grit? This perseverance, this ability to keep working hard, even if you don't get the outcomes you desire. Then Cal Newport said, be so good they can't ignore you. He said passion is overrated. Build a skill set. Build a monetizable skill set that nobody can copy, that people value, and that's how you'll be successful. Simon Sinek tossed me back, saying, don't start with the how or the when, start with the why. And he gave the example of Apple. Be mission-driven. Figure out why you're on this planet. And I thought about that, and I said, okay, my personal mission is to make sure that everybody I come in contact with feels loved. Then I kept reading, because as I said, I'm a nerd, not very good at video games. All of you have heard of this theory of atomic habits. We can't make giant changes overnight. We have to build small, sustainable habits, and those small, sustainable habits over a period of time are what can change us into these ideal, successful human beings that we want to be. Mihail Csikszentmihalyi, I worked really hard to pronounce this and I've still said it wrong, came up with this idea of flow, right? We should look at that point where we're so passionate and so involved in the work that we're doing that we don't even realize what's happening around us. We don't realize time is passing. And when you talk to sports people, when you talk to artists, when you talk to scientists, they all talk about this idea of flow, being so deeply involved in the work that you're doing that the external world doesn't matter. Steve Jobs, in an address, said, you shouldn't look at finding the big picture when you're going forward. You should be able to connect the dots backwards. So things may not make sense right now, but you should keep doing them. And later, when you have your success story, you'll be able to connect the dots and tell people how you had it planned all along. That sounded like good advice to me. And then recently, I read this book by Adam Grant, who is very cleverly called Google's favorite psychologist. And Adam Grant says it's all about give and take. If you want to be successful, you give, and then you get back. Sounded like solid advice, too. Jake Knapp and John Zeratsky of Google came up with two concepts. One is make time for things that you value. Time exists, but we're in control of it. So make time for things that you value. And if you want to get big things done, do a sprint. Take a week, disconnect from everything else, and make a jump forward. Cal Newport again came back with his ideas of deep work and digital minimalism. Find a place where you disconnect from everything else. Don't get caught up with too much technology. Don't think that multitasking is possible, because we're still hardcore single-tasking, but sequentially. The moment you move from something to something else, there is a gap. You can't do more than one thing at a time. Nir Eyal came up first with the theory of hooked, which he pitched to entrepreneurs, saying, create products that make people so hooked that they can't do without them. And then as a response, a couple of years later, he wrote a book called Indistractable. Don't get hooked by things that other people make. Brené Brown said, in the middle of all of this, remember to be vulnerable, right? Shame, vulnerability, all of these things are important, and they're a very important part of the human experience that often get left out. By this time, I was slightly confused. I don't know if you're following me, but I was slightly confused. Then I read a book called Surrounded by Idiots by Thomas Erickson, where he doesn't actually call people idiots. I feel like I have to clarify this because most people think that that's what it's about, where he defined 4 types of people and attributed colors to them. And people are defined by these personality traits. According to this book, I'm a red. So I said, okay, fine, this is my identity. I'm a red. How do I take that forward? Then I read Sonia Lyubomirsky, and she says, you know what? All of this is fine, but what we seek is happiness and self-fulfillment, and 40% of that is self-determined. When you look at the other 60%, 40% is genetic, 20% is circumstances, but 40% of your happiness is self-determined. Gratitude is a very important part of that. Having something that you believe in that's larger than yourself is another big part of that. Okay, I'm still taking notes. Then I was reading a McKinsey report that there's a $1.5 trillion industry on positive health and mindfulness. So I said, okay, this sounds okay. I've got my Fitbit on. I'm trying to get my steps in. I'm measuring my heart rate. I've got a continuous glucose monitoring device. I really think I'm hacking life in the right way. And then I hear that learned optimism is a thing. We can't always change what happens to us, but we can be optimistic. Now, by the end of all of this, I was amused. I was also confused, right? What's the right answer in all of this? How do I sift out my story of success, of self-worth, of optimism, of identity, from all of these different things written by smart people? And then I realized, you have to build your own framework. All of these ideas are great, but your identity really depends not on what other people are saying about you or what you read, but what you believe about yourself. So these are some tips that helped me. I'm not promising they'll help you, because I don't want to be on a list like this when someone else talks a few years down the line, but I found that I should be open-minded, but not directionless. I should be willing to get feedback from everybody else, but I should have a rough idea of where I'm trying to go. I should be determined, but not stubborn, right? That's a delicate line. I should be interdependent, interact with people, need people, work with people, but not codependent. You know, being needy is not a nice look on anybody, right? Naive. Believe the best in people, but don't be stupid, right? I feel like that one should be a tattoo for me, don't be stupid, but I'm just going to leave it on this slide. Be brave, but don't be reckless. Try to stand at the edge of something, but beware that if you're not looking out for yourself, you might get pushed over. Be optimistic, but not foolish, right? So look up at the sun and be grateful, but also plan for rain. And when I put this framework together, I was like, I'm never going to remember this. So what usually works well is if you think of an acronym for something, right? Again, I'm a nerd, so acronyms are things that excite me. So I'm like, okay, this could be my framework. I'll call it the Odinbo framework. It has such a nice ring to it. It really doesn't, does it? So I kind of, with all humility, looked for another acronym. I said, okay, let me be brave. Let me be interdependent. Let me be naive, determined, open-minded, and optimistic. And I said, yeah, the Bindu framework. I could remember that. And then I remembered that I forgot one important facet. Be humble, right? So I've got the Bindu framework here. With all honesty, this is not me being arrogant. I was hoping there would be some laughs. Thank you. And if there's one message I can leave you with, it's this. Your identity is not set in stone. There's no single right answer. Be something that you can say with certainty is what you want to be. Because if you're trying to keep other people happy, it'll never happen. Your identity can keep changing. It should keep changing. The first degree that you take will not define the rest of your life. Every choice that you make is not limiting. Go forward. Be yourself. Be brave. Be honest. Right? Be humble. And know that no matter what, you are loved. Thank you.